Hello everybody, I hope you're doing well. Today I want to show you how to set up cameras in Maya. Now before we get started with that, we first want to change our workspace over to the animation workspace because we're going to be doing just a little bit of animating with these cameras. So to do that, I'm going to go up to Windows, Workspaces, Animation. And that's going to give us this graph editor here at the bottom, which we'll be using later. And now to create my first camera. There's a couple different ways to create cameras, but the first one is to go up to here at the Create menu and go to Cameras, select Camera. And I'm noticing right away that my camera looks pretty big compared to the rest of the environment. And actually, my environment is pretty small because I wasn't accounting for real world scale. Now, because things are going to look really small in the camera, if I don't size things at least sort of properly, I'm going to scale everything in my environment up so it's much larger. So to do that, I'm going to make sure that everything is in a group. So I'm going to select everything that's not my camera and make sure it's to middle mouse drag it into my environment group. And then with the environments group selected, I can go over to scale and put in a number like 25. Scale everything up universally. And now it's a bit too much. To make it perhaps 15 will be better. And 10. There we go. That seems pretty good. So I created this camera using the Create menu, but there is another way to create cameras, and that is to go to View in your viewport and go down to Create Camera from View. And you'll notice that another camera has appeared in our outliner, but we don't see it anywhere because we're actually piloting that camera now. By default, the new camera will be called Persp1 or Perspective 1 because your default camera is this perspective camera. So if I want to see this new camera, I need to stop piloting it. And to do that, I'm going to go to Panels, Perspective, and I'm just going to go to my default perspective camera. Click that, pull back a little bit, and there's the new camera that I created from my view. Now, if I want to look through a camera, but also have my normal perspective camera, I can have them lined up side by side by clicking this button right here to create a two-panel view. And then going to Panels on the left side or the right side if you prefer, but I'm going to use the left. Go to Panels, Perspective, Perspective 1. And now I'm looking through this camera in this panel. And then if I select my camera and use the move tool to move it around, you can see that it affects what I see in my camera. I can also manipulate my camera's position by just interacting with it as I would my normal viewport perspective camera. And you can see every time I make a little movement, it affects the position here. Now, being able to move the camera from the camera's own perspective is really great. It can be really easy to sometimes accidentally move your camera when you didn't mean to. So to prevent this, you're going to want to lock your camera from time to time. So to do that, you're going to go up to this button up here and press it. And then no matter what I do, I can't move the camera either from my left or right screens. If I want to bring the textures back into this view, I can just click this button here, which is the checkered sphere. And I could do the same over here if I wanted to see the gray textures. And I'm just going to set up a nice establishing shot here. I'm going to hide my outliner. While my viewport here is square, this isn't the actual resolution of the camera. To see what the actual true resolution is, I'm going to go up to this button here to turn on my resolution gate. And that puts a rectangle around our view, which shows exactly the frame that will be rendered out. Next, let's take a look at our camera settings. So to access these settings, we would go to the attribute editor. However, mine is missing from my right-hand side, likely because I switched to the animation workspace. But this is no problem. I can bring it back by going to Windows, General Editors, Attribute Editor. And it comes up as a pop-up, but I can just dock it back here. There we go. So there are a lot of settings for cameras because cameras in Maya are supposed to replicate real-world cameras as much as possible, including any sort of setting you could imagine that a real camera could have. So there's a lot of things you can set. We're not going to worry about most of these things, but we are going to worry about our focal length for one, and our depth of field as well. So the first setting we want to pay attention to is our focal length. And the focal length is simply the magnification of our camera. So if I drag this up, it's very touchy, so sliding it up will zoom in quite a bit very quickly. If I pull out, we can zoom out very quickly as well. By default, we start at a focal length of 35. So that's a good place to start from, and then you can make adjustments from there. If you want to go to 25 or 60. But I think for the time being, I'm just going to go for 30 for now. The next thing I want to show you is the depth of field, which you'll have to close some of these menus to get down to this one. You might be closed at first, but you just open it up and check the depth of field. And this defines the focus of our lens. So right now, everything is pretty out of focus, but if I give it a higher number on the focus distance, let's make it 50, that skull starts to come into view. And if, say I make it 40 again, I can increase the f-stop to increase the range at which things are in focus. So this is really good for getting a little bit more realistic camera effects with. Alright, so I have my establishing shot, but let's say I want it to zoom in a little bit, very slowly. Well, for that, we're going to need to start animating. So I'm going to pull up my graph editor right here. And then my working panel, I'm going to finite camera, press F to zoom in on it. I'm going to go to my channel box, and what I want to do is I want to set a key. And what setting a key is basically defining a keyframe for a certain channel. So I can set keyframes for translation, rotation, scale, visibility, and I can even set it for other settings like my focal length or my focus distance. So to set a keyframe, I'm going to select these attributes. I'm going to hold right click. I'm going to select key selected. And these red bars appear next to anything that is keyframed. You'll see down here in the graph editor, we have all these keyframes that have appeared right here as well. Now if I move down the time slider, you'll see that all these bars turn pink. That means that there's a keyframe on that channel, but it's not keyframed at the current frame. So I want this shot to last for 4 seconds. So to set up my shot for 4 seconds, I'm going to adjust my playback range. To do that, I can grab this handle right here and just drag it in. And grab it to bring it to 96 seconds, which is 4 seconds at a frame rate of 24 frames per second. I can also manually set my playback range by typing in a number here. So I can put 100. We'll make it bring it to 96. This is different than the total length of the animation, which is set to 200. The total length of the animation is set in the box just to the right of the playback range. So now to create the effect of this camera moving inwards, I'm going to drag my time slider all the way to the end, and I'm going to press W to go to my move tool. I'm going to hold W and left click to change into my object space rather than world space, so that I can just move it forward. And move it forward a lot. I think I'll even bring it down a little bit. Get a little bit of rotation. And now, just because I haven't moved it doesn't mean that the keyframe is set. if I were to change frames, this work that I just did would snap back to that old keyframe. So what I need to do is set a new keyframe like I did before. All of my channels are already selected, so I'm just going to right click, key selected again. Or if I don't want to do that work all the time, I'm going to undo that keyframe. What I could do is I could turn on auto keyframe with this button. And then I'm just going to move this a little bit just to make sure it remembers where it's at. See, now as I move my camera around, it sets those keyframes automatically without me having to worry about setting those keyframes for each frame. So there's benefits and drawbacks to each. Sometimes you can accidentally set keyframes you didn't mean to if the auto keyframe is on, but it can really speed up your workflow as well. Now, when I hit play, I find that my left viewport isn't moving. But when I hit stop, the animation does update. So this is due to a hidden setting in our playback settings, which we can access by hitting this button of the little man running with next to a gear. And we go over here, and we can change update view from active to all. So if you run into this problem, just remember to change that setting, and then the animation will play back perfectly in all my panels. So now this is looking pretty good, but let's start making a couple tweaks to this animation. And to do that, we're going to utilize the graph editor. So the graph editor basically plots out all the different changes in the translation and rotation and whatever channels you set over time and a graph. But what gives you a little more control is these curves. So every keyframe has Bezier curves attached, which I like to manipulate how each channel is changing over time. So if I move to this frame over here and then change the curve of the translation on the x-axis, you can see that it actually has really drastic effects. By default, whenever you make new animations, your keyframes will be set to ease in and ease out of the animation. So it will start really slow, it'll speed up, it'll slow down again. But sometimes you want to start with an immediate fast action. To do that, you could select all the keyframes you want to start fast and select this button right here to make the curve progress linearly to the next keyframe rather than smoothly. So the effect will be a lot more rigid and it will start at the maximum speed before slowing down. So I'm going to press play. It starts out at full speed and then slows down. Furthermore, I could grab these keyframes, hold shift and then middle mouse drag them. By holding shift, it makes sure that they don't go up or down. If I were to not hold shift or just middle mouse drag, I could drag these all over the place and mess everything up. And by moving those keyframes earlier, the animation will now play faster and reach the resting position sooner. Now let's say I want the resting position to still be on the last frame, but I want it to get most of the way there sooner in the animation. So another thing I could do is I could go over here. I'm going to key selected right in this spot. And I'm going to grab these keys and I'm going to drag them closer to the front. So now they reached that point that I key from here earlier and slowly ease into that ending position. Press play. Yeah, it's a little bit drastic, so I can adjust that. There, I like that. And I think I want to adjust the depth of field as well. Let's change this focus distance. So to change the focus distance, I can set a key on that as well. So I'm going to make this bigger. Set key there as well. And I want to find the focus distance in my graph editor. So to do that, I'm going to press this little plus in the box next to my perspective camera. Open this up. And I'm going to grab the focus distance here. So now I can adjust this value in my graph editor. Instead of having to manually punch in numbers. So I'm going to find what feels focused there. Drop the f-stop a bit. And there we go. The camera now slowly comes into focus as we zoom in. Now that I'm happy with that shot, I'm going to go ahead and actually make this a shot in what is called the camera sequencer. So to get to the camera sequencer, I'm going to go up to Windows, Animation Editor, Camera Sequencer. I'll pop up this window, which is basically like a timeline for switching between cameras. So double checking to make sure that my playback range is where I want it. It's 1 to 96. That's good. I'm going to press this button to create a shot. And now that I've made my first shot, I'm going to go ahead and set up my second shot. Luckily, I already have a camera right here, which I can utilize. So I'm going to go over my type panel, perspective, camera 1. I'm just going to move this into a new position. Let's say right here. Here's the focal length, like 25. And while we're still on the subject of shots, I'm going to go ahead and set up this shot right now. I already know the values I want. I'm going to make this shot from frame 97 to frame 240. And with this panel selected, I'm going to click Create Shot. And I'm just going to slide this down to the end where it transitions over to the next shot. And you can see when I scrub through the timeline in the camera sequencer, it automatically switches between cameras for me. And then with this camera, I'm going to go ahead and close the camera sequencer for now. With this camera, I want it to wrap around the skull. To make sure that it always stays focused on the skull, I'm going to create a focal point. So I'm simply going to press T on my keyboard. And now I have two gizmos to work with. One placed on the camera and one extended out from the camera. So this one, I'm going to simply drag it into my skull. And no matter where I move the camera, it's always going to look at this gizmo now. And of course, key selected. And move down. Say frame 220. If you click off of your camera, you might need to press T again just to make sure that focal point is still there. All right. And I scrub through. You can see it's still focusing on that skull. However, right at that midway point, it feels like it's getting too close. So I'm going to go ahead and move it back a little, just kind of keep the flow going around. Actually, I've decided that I don't really want it to go from the left side to the right. I want it to go the other way around. So to do that, I'm going to simply grab these frames, drag them all over here, swap places, the frames, the beginning, these, put them there, and press play. And just like that, I've reversed the animation. So now I've got my two shots. I'm going to go back into Windows, Animation Editors, Camera Sequencer, and now I'm going to go to Create Ubercam. And what Ubercam is basically a camera like any other, but it is taken all of the animation data from the two shots we set up and made one camera out of them. So if I slide out my range, I set my panel to perspective Ubercam, you can see it switches right over. And it's really nice because then we can export a video of just the one camera. If you need to make changes to your shots, go ahead and make those changes on the original cameras, delete your Ubercam, and then make a new one. So now that I've got my Ubercam set up, I want to make a video of this. However, I don't want to actually render out each frame with full quality lighting. Instead, what I want to do is create something called a Playblast video. And all a Playblast is a video that is comprised of screenshots of your scene, taken directly out of your viewport, rather than fully rendered images with ray tracing and everything. The idea is to get an idea of how your scene is playing out and make sure that your timings and animations are all working okay without having to painstakingly wait for every single frame to render as if you were making a final version of the scene. Before we make a video of this, let's go ahead and make sure we have a good resolution. Because right now we are going to be rendering at 960 by 540, and that's pretty small. So I'm going to go up to here and click this button, which is Display Render Settings. It'll pop up this menu, and there's a lot of things to play with right here. But all we want to worry about is under image size, we're going to change the preset from HD 540 HD 1080, and that will render a much better image. And I don't want the render gate to be in our Playblast, so I'm going to turn that off and turn our textures back on, and then making sure I'm in the animation menu set, I'm going to go to Playback, Playblast. I'm going to press the square here to access the Playblast settings, just to make sure that they are set up correctly. You want to make sure it is in the AVI format. You don't want to have any encoding. Quality 100 is fine. And scale, make sure that's at 1. You can give your movie file a name. If you are playblasting something that's a really, really long file, you might start getting errors when trying to play it back. So that's when you might need to start messing with the quality. But otherwise, you can probably leave the quality at the maximum. And once you're set up, I'm going to hit Playblast. It's a run through and take screenshots of every frame. And then once it's done, this is the result. So Playblasting is a really great way to get a preview of what your scene will look like without having to painstakingly render each image. So those are the basics to set up your cameras. I hope that goes really smoothly for you, and I hope you have a good one.